Dear fellow truth seekers, thank you and welcome for visiting my channel, MythoReligio. MythoReligio is a series of books about religious comparison studies between the stories in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism and Buddhism, directly from their sacred books and world mythologies, hence the name MythoReligio. The purpose is to retrace the prehistory of humanity, since I am not fully satisfied with either the explanations from the point of view of creationists nor evolutionists. There are so many missing links in both explanations. If you feel the same, then you are on the right channel. In this book series, I will also analyze about the prehistory of humanity from the archaeological records, modern scientific point of view, and other alternative theories, such as the ancient alien theories and Atlantis or Lemuria legends. After thorough research of circa 30 years, I recognize many similarities between all religious stories and even mythologies, and surprisingly, some of them are in accordance or even beyond modern science that have been proven as correct. Thus, I came to the conclusion that all religions must have come from the same source. And all these religious stories and mythologies, although heavily jumbled up, are actually telling one mega story, the true prehistory of our common ancestors. This mega story is quite different than what we have been told to believe and will truly blow your mind, as it is more fascinating than our imagination. If you have watched the earlier videos in this channel, I believe you can see some of the similarities too. If you haven't and you truly want to do a religious comparative study, I suggest that you do so. The best way to do a comprehensive religious study via this channel is by watching the videos starting from number 1 and continue until this present video and so on. That way you will see a clear pattern. For deeper analysis that I cannot share in this platform due to its sensitive nature that leads to the above conclusion, kindly read the books that are available in ebook format that can be found in my website www.mythoreligio.com or the physical books at Amazon in color or black and white version. World mythologies with similarities to Abrahamic religious stories. Dear fellow truth seekers, so far we have covered almost all of the main stories in Judeo-Christianity and in brief the stories from the rest of the major religions, i.e. Islam, Hinduism and Buddhism. Now, I would like to share with you several main myths from other cultures which surprisingly have similarities to the major religious stories. Of the countless myths around the world, I am only selecting a few representatives from the 6 continents, i.e. Middle East, Europe, America, Asia, Africa, Australia and Pacific. The stories from the Judeo-Christianity as well as the Islamic traditions are centralized upon the people of the Middle East. However, there are several myths that are not considered as part of the Abrahamic religions that are also originated from the Middle East. The Middle East lies at the juncture of Eurasia, Africa, the Mediterranean Sea and Indian Ocean. The earliest civilizations, Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, originated in the Fertile Crescent and the Nile Valley regions of the ancient Middle East, including the civilizations of the Levant, Persia and Arabian Peninsula. Mesopotamia, literally a country between 2 rivers from Greek mesos, meaning middle, and potamos, meaning river, is the collective name given to the area of the Fertile Crescent, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, largely corresponding to modern Iraq, some parts of northeastern Syria, some parts of southeastern Turkey, and some parts of the Khuzestan province of southwestern Iran. Mesopotamia is considered by historians as the cradle of civilization. Before we start with the storytelling, I think it is necessary for a little historical background of this location. It can be quite confusing, since this area had been occupied by several different kingdoms or civilizations with totally different names than today. The following is the timeline of the kingdoms and civilizations that have occupied Mesopotamia in comparison to Egypt and Israel for our comparison study. The years mentioned are years before the birth of Jesus Christ or BCE, before Common Era. The kingdoms and civilizations that had occupied Mesopotamia, among others, are Sumer, Akkadian, Babylon, and Assyria. The myths from the civilizations are somewhat confusing, since they are similar, intertwined, and overlapping. So, the first known civilization that occupied the Mesopotamian area is called Sumer. According to historians, the Sumerian was the first civilization known to men and the first to invent the written language. It is also believed that they were a non-Semitic, non-Indo-European people whose racial and linguistic affiliation is still unclassifiable. The term Sumerian is given by their successors, the Semitic Akkadians. The Sumerians referred to themselves as Uksagigga, literally meaning the black-headed people. They invented cuneiform writing, and many historians believe that the Sumerians developed religious and spiritual concepts together with a remarkably well-integrated pantheon, which profoundly influenced all the people of the Near East, including the Hebrews and the Greeks. They produced an extensive body of literature that is amongst the oldest in the world. Since its first archaeological excavation in the mid-19th century CE, thousands of Sumerian inscriptional materials have been found. Although no more than 1% are in literary compositions, the rest is economic in character. Not all of these literary inscriptions are ready for us to read because of linguistic difficulty, and they are scattered. Many are fragmented and chipped. I'm going to share several stories from these inscriptions that are interesting for our comparison study only. They are not told chronologically. The Sumerian King List. Historians date the beginning of Sumerian civilization at circa 4500 BCE. However, this is not according to the Sumerians themselves. Sumerians believed that kingship was handed down directly by the gods, and the list of their kings is recorded in the Sumerian King List. The Sumerian King List is an ancient clay tablet in Sumerian language, listing not only kings of Sumer but also from foreign dynasties. It records the location of the kingship, the name of the rulers, and the length of their reigns. The Sumerian King List was initially composed during the late 3rd millennium BCE and extended at early 2nd millennium BCE. The list recorded all the rulers of the earth since 400,000 years. It is believed that all the early rulers were allegedly gods, demigods, or immortals. This huge stretch of time, coupled with reigns into the thousands of years, has caused most historians to reject its accuracy. The list starts with the names of kings before the Great Flood. However, none of the following pre-dynastic antediluvian or pre-flood rulers have been verified via archaeological excavations. The first ruler's name after the kingship descended from heaven was King Alulin. He ruled for 28,800 years. Then, another 7 kings' names are listed. Their reigns lasted between 18,600 years to 43,200 years. The last king before the flood was named Ubaratutu. After the flood had swept over, the kingship descended from heaven in Kish. Kish was the ancient name of the modern city of Tel al-Uhayyimir in Iraq. The list continues with many kings' names, and the length of their reigns was a lot shorter, although still very long for our modern standard. The period lasted between 305 to 1,500 years. Then it becomes shorter and shorter. Mesopotamian Pantheon. The gods of the Mesopotamian region were by no means uniform in name, power, provenance, or status in the hierarchy. Mesopotamian culture varied from region to region, from city-state to city-state, and because of this Marduk should not be regarded as king of the gods in the same way Zeus ruled in Greece. While Marduk was venerated highly in Babylon, Enlil held that place in Sumer. It should also be noted that the English word demon, understood as an evil spirit, derives from the Greek word daimon, which means simply spirit, and that many of the supernatural entities of the Mesopotamian pantheon designated as demons were not necessarily evil. The Mesopotamian people worshipped between 300 and 1,000 different gods. In this video, I will only share with you a version of the genealogies of the gods that are most significant for our comparison study in the simplest manner. There are many quite messy and overlapping versions. Namu was a Sumerian goddess of the primeval sea, corresponding to goddess Tiamat in Babylonian mythology. She gave birth to the sky father god Anu and earth mother goddess Ki. Anu, or An, was the sky father god and husband and brother of Ki. The Sumerian word An is translated as heaven, and he was associated with thunder rolling across the skies. During storms, he was imagined as a great bull roaring above the clouds. Anu became in time the supreme lord who was the power behind all the other deities. He is depicted with a horned cap. Ki was the Earth Mother goddess, goddess of fertility, nature, and life on Earth. She is also known confusingly by many other names, among others as Ninhursag, Nintu, Ninma, Mami, and Mama. Anu and Ki had two most prominent sons called Enki and Enlil. They also had other children who are collectively called as the Anunnaki. Anunnaki are the Mesopotamian fates and judges of the dead. In Babylon mythologies, they were considered spirits of the earth, but also depicted in the role of judges or those who see. Ea, or Enki, was the Babylonian god of wisdom, magic, and fresh waters, known in Sumer as Enki, and introduced or at least further developed by the Akkadians. He was the wisest among the gods and the patron of craftsmen, artisans, and exorcists. In one story, he allows himself to become drunk and gives away the meh, the gifts of civilization and property of the gods, to goddess Inanna, knowing she will disperse them to humanity. He is uniformly depicted as a friend of human beings and their advocate among the gods. He was represented with flowing streams of water and swimming fishes. Elil, or Enlil, was the god of the wind and storms, the king of gods before he is replaced by Marduk. Marduk was the Babylonian king of the gods, the hero god who defeated Tiamat, the primeval mother of the gods, the force of darkness and chaos, who was often depicted as a dragon. Note, Marduk's servant was also a dragon called Muhushu or Cyrus. Ninlil was the goddess of air, wife of Enlil. Her parents are unclear or variously described. Ninurta was the son of Enlil and Ninlil. He was a god of war and the south wind. He is usually depicted as an archer, either standing or running on the back of a monster with the body of a lion and the tail of a scorpion. Nanna, also known as Nanna-Swen, Nanar, or Sin, was also a son of Enlil and Ninlil, considered as important deity in the act of creation. His symbol is the crescent moon, and he was associated with the power of the bull and lion dragon. Ningal was also a goddess of fertility, associated with the son and wife and cousin of Nanna, daughter of Enki. Nanna and Ningal were the parents of Ereshkigal, was a Sumerian goddess of the underworld and queen of the dead. Her consort was the bull of heaven. Utu, also known as Shamash, Samas, or Babar, was a Sumerian god of the sun and justice, one of the oldest deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon. He was represented with a saw knife and fiery rays. Inanna, also known to the Assyrians as Ishtar, the goddess of sexuality, passion, fertility, love, prostitutes, and war. She was the wife of Dumuzi. She is often depicted riding on a lion and referred to as the Queen of Heaven. She was the twin sister of Utu or Shamash, the sun god. Dumuzi, another god of fertility and shepherds and husband of Inanna. Note: Ishtar was a daughter of An and an unknown mother in one tradition, and mother of Dumuzi. But in another version, Ishtar was also known as Inanna, who was the wife of Dumuzi, which makes her both wife and mother of Dumuzi. Confusing, I know. Now, I will share the stories of the previously mentioned Mesopotamian gods and goddesses of the Sumerian version. Some of their stories have been compared by several historians to some Abrahamic religious stories. The main source of these stories came from the Sumerian tablets found in a book entitled Sumerian Mythology, translated by the world-renowned Sumerian language and history expert Samuel Noah Kramer. Note: triple dots in the stories mean there are texts missing on the tablets. Sumerian Mythologies. Creation of the universe. The poem of the creation of the universe began with primordial salt water called Namun. At first, the heaven god, An or Anu, and the earth goddess Ki were united. They united and created the air god Enlil, who became the king of gods. Enlil has a brother called Enki, the water, wisdom, and creation god. The rest of the children of An and Ki are called the Anunnaki. Then Enlil separated the heaven and the earth. When Enlil was a young god, he was banished from Nibiru, home of the gods, to Kur, the underworld, for raping a goddess named Ninlil. The story opens with a description of the city of Nippur, or Nibru, or Nibiru, its walls, river, canals, and well, portrayed as the home of the gods, and according to Kramer, that seems to be conceived as having existed before the creation of man. There was a city, the one we live in. Nibru or Nippur was a city, the one we live in. Durjik-Nimbar was a city, the one we live in. Itzala is its holy river. Karjektina is its quay. Kar Azar is its quay where boats make fast. Pul-Al is its freshwater well. It-Ninburtum is its branching canal, and if one measures from there, its cultivated land is 50 sar each way. Enlil was one of its young men, and Ninlil was one its young women. The story continues by introducing the goddess Nunbar Chagunu, warning her daughter Ninlil about the likelihood of romantic advances from Enlil if she strays too near the river. Ninlil resists Enlil's first approach, after which he entreats his minister to take him across the river. On the other side, the couple meet and float downstream, either bathing or in a boat, then lie on the bank together, kiss, and conceive Nana, or Suen, the moon god. The story then cuts to Enlil walking in the Ki-Ur or Kur, where the other gods arrest him for his relationship with Ninlil and exile him from the city for being ritually impure. Enlil was walking in the Ki-Ur. As Enlil was going about in the Ki-Ur, the 50 great gods and the 7 gods who decide destinies had Enlil arrested in the Ki-Ur. Enlil, ritually impure, leave the city. The Namnir, possibly an epithet of Enlil meaning the well-respected, ritually impure, leave the city. Enlil, in accordance with what had been decided, Nunamnir, in accordance with what had been decided. Enlil went. Ninlil followed. There follows 3 similar episodes as Enlil leaves the city. Speaking to as the keeper of the city gate, keeper of the holy barrier, the man who guards Itkura, the Sumerian river of the underworld similar to the river Styx in Greek mythology, and lastly Si-Lu Igi, the underworld ferryman similar to Charon in Greek mythology. Each time Enlil tells these characters, "When your lady Ninlil comes, if she asks after me, don't you tell her where I am." Ninlil follows him, asking each, "When did your lord Enlil go by?" To this, Enlil in disguise tells her, "My lord has not talked with me at all, O loveliest one. Enlil has not talked to me at all, O loveliest one." Upon which Ninlil offers to have sex with him, and each time they conceive another god. 2 of the offsprings are gods of the underworld, and the third is a god of irrigation. The myth ends with praise for fertility of Enlil and Ninlil. "You are Lord, your King. Enlil, you are Lord, your King. Nunamnir, you are Lord, your King. You are supreme Lord, you are powerful Lord. Lord who makes flax grow, Lord who makes barley grow. You are Lord of heaven, Lord plenty, Lord of the earth. You are Lord of the earth, Lord plenty, Lord of heaven. Enlil in heaven, Enlil is King, Lord whose pronouncements cannot be altered at all. His primordial utterances will not be changed. For the praise spoken for Ninlil the mother, praise be to the great mountain, Father Enlil." It has been suggested and theorized by some scholars that the event where Enlil assumed 3 forms might be the first concept of Trinity as well as incarnation. Other scholars propose that Anu, the heavenly father god, Enlil, the wind god of the earth, and Enki, the water wisdom god, were the original Sumerian Trinity gods. If rightly interpreted, this poem furnishes us with the first known example of the metamorphosis of a god. Sumerian Mythology, Samuel Noah Kramer. Inanna and the Hulupu Tree. Inanna was a granddaughter of Enki. The goddess Inanna's throne was carved from the trunk of the Hulupu tree where Lilith built her home. In Mesopotamian religion, Lilith was classified as a female demon. In Judeo-Christian mythology, she became a demonic figure, the primordial she-demon and alternately the first wife of Adam. She is first mentioned in the Old Testament, the book of Isaiah, chapter 34, verse 14. The branches of the aforementioned Hulupu tree were cut off by Anzu. Anzu was a servant of the king of the gods Enlil. Anzu is often depicted as a lion-headed eagle, which is reminiscent of the hybrid creature in the vision of the biblical prophet Ezekiel. Here's the poem about Anzu in a Sumerian cuneiform tablet that has been compared by several historians to the story of the forbidden tree with its snake in the Bible. In the first days, in the very first days, in the first nights, in the very first nights, in the first years, in the very first years. At that time it was planted, a tree, a single tree by the banks of the great river. Enki, the father, did plant the Hulupu tree. The god of wisdom, he planted it by the banks of the Euphrates, before he set sail, before the father departed for the underworld. The years passed, 5 years, then 10 years. The tree grew thick, but its bark did not split. Then a serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the Hulupu tree. The Anzu bird set his young in the branches of the tree. The dark maid Lilith built her home in the trunk. The serpent who could not be charmed loosened the roots. The serpent who could not be charmed from the Hulupu tree went forth. the Ansu bird cut off the branches. The Ansu bird flew with his young to the mountains. Then Lilith smashed her home and bore the tree into the city. Into the sacred city of Uruk she carried it. From the trunk of the tree, the sons of Uruk carved a shining throne for Inanna. Dumuzid or Dumuzi, the resurrected shepherd god. Dumuzi, the shepherd god, was the consort of Inanna, the love goddess. Dumuzi is described by Inanna as fair-spoken mouth and of the ever-kind eyes. Although being a god, the name Dumuzi also appears twice in the Sumerian king list as earthly kings. First, he was nicknamed the Shepherd, reigning for 36,000 years, being the 5th king before the flood. Second, he was nicknamed the Fisherman, reigning for circa 100 years at circa 2800 BCE. There are several separate versions of the Dumuzi story, the main being that Dumuzi died and was mourned by Inanna and his sister Geshtinanna, and also by his dog, the lambs and kids in his fold. Dumuzi himself wept at the cruel fate in store for him, after he had walked among men and the cruel Gala or demons of the underworld seized him. Then Inanna set off for the underworld or Kur, which was ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. She passed through 7 gates, and at each one was required to leave a garment or an ornament, so that when she had passed through the 7th gate, she was entirely naked. She kept on going and finally dared to sit herself upon her sister's throne. Immediately the gods of the underworld judged her, gazed at her with the eyes of death, and she became a corpse, hung up on a nail. Based on the incomplete text, it was assumed that Inanna's descent into Kur, land of no return, occurred after the death of Dumuzi, and that her purpose was to rescue Dumuzi. In one version, during Inanna's descent to Kur, the god Enki created a beautiful being of light called Ashushunamir to accompany Inanna. Ashushunamir was a hermaphrodite. Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead and Inanna's sister, was charmed by Ashushunamir and tried to keep this beautiful being to her bed. So she called for a great feast with wine and food to be held for Ashushunamir. But Ashushunamir was careful to pour the wine upon the floor and to eat no food prepared by the servants of the queen. When the queen of the dead grew careless from the wine, Ashushunamir asked if he or she might taste the water of life that was kept locked in a cellar. Later, when the queen of the dead fell into a deep sleep, Ashushunamir made his or her way to the lampless cell where Inanna, captive, lay dying. She sprinkled Inanna with the water of life, and Inanna was resurrected. Ashushunamir was not as fortunate. When the queen of the dead awoke, the queen cursed him or her. "The food of the gutter shalt thou eat," cried the queen. "The water of the sewer shall be your drink. In the shadows you shall abide, despised and hated by even your own kind." Having pronounced the curse, Ashushunamir was then banished. Meanwhile, the conservation of souls law required Inanna to find a replacement for herself in Kur. So she went from one god to another, but each one pleaded with her, and she had not the heart to go through with it until she found Dumuzi richly dressed on the queen's throne. From trying to rescue Dumuzi, ironically, Inanna immediately set her accompanying demons on Dumuzi. Dumuzi fled to his sister, Geshtinanna, who attempted to hide him but who could not in the end stand up to the demons. Dumuzi had 2 close calls until the demons finally caught up with him. However, Inanna repented. Finally, Inanna relented and changed her decree, thereby resurrecting her husband Dumuzi to life. An arrangement was made by which Geshtinanna would take Dumuzi's place in Kur for 6 months of the year. You, Dumuzi, half the year. Your sister, Geshtinanna, half the year. Thus, Dumuzi, according to the Sumerian mythographers, rose from the dead annually and after staying on earth for half the year, descended to the underworld for the other half. In cult practice, the dead Dumuzi was widely mourned in the ancient Middle East at around summer solstice, i.e. the beginning of summer on the 21st of June. Babylonians marked the decline in daylight hours and the onset of killing summer heat and drought with a 6-day funeral for the god Dumuzi, or Akkadian Tammuz. These mourning ceremonies were observed even at the very door of the temple in Jerusalem, to the horror of the Israelite prophet Ezekiel, whose biblical prophecy expresses Yahweh's anger at his people's apostate worship of idols. See the book of Ezekiel, chapter 8, verse 14 to 15. Ninti, the Lady of the Rib. Here is a story that has been suggested by some religious scholars as the probable origin of the biblical creation of a woman, i.e. Eve, from a man's rib. The Earth Mother Goddess Ninhursag created a beautiful garden full of lush vegetation and fruit trees, called Edenu in Eden, the Sumerian earthly paradise, a place which the Sumerians believed to exist to the east of their own land beyond the sea. Ninhursag charged the water god Enki, her lover, or in another version her son, with controlling the wild animals and tending the garden. But Enki became curious about the garden and he ate 8 of the plants. This enraged Ninhursag and she caused Enki to fall ill. Enki fell ill in 8 parts of his body. One of the pains was in his rib, which is a pun in Sumerian as the word Ti means both rib and life. The other gods persuaded Ninhursag to relent. Ninhursag then created a new goddess named Ninti, a name made up of Nin, or lady, plus Ti, or life or rib, which can be translated as both Lady of Living and Lady of the Rib, similar to Eve to cure Enki. The creation of man. According to the biblical story, man was fashioned from clay for the purpose of ruling over all the animals. According to the Sumerian poem, man was fashioned of clay as in the biblical version. The purpose for which he was created, however, was to free the gods from laboring for their sustenance. The poem begins with what may be a description of the difficulties of the gods in procuring their bread. The gods complain, but Enki, the water god, who as the Sumerian god of wisdom might have been expected to come to their aid, was lying asleep in the deep and failed to hear them. Thereupon his mother, Namu, the primeval sea, the mother who gave birth to all the gods, brought the tears of the gods before Enki, saying, O my son, rise from thy bed, from thy ... work what is wise. Fashion servants of the gods, may they produce their ... Enki replied, O my mother, the creature whose name thou hast uttered, it exists. Bind upon it the ... of the gods. Mix the heart of the clay that is over the abyss. The god and princely fashioner will thicken the clay. Do thou bring the limbs into existence. Ninma, another name of Ninhursag, the Earth Mother Goddess, will work above thee. ... Goddess of birth, will stand by thee at thy fashioning. O my mother, decree thou it's the newborn's fate. Ninma will bind upon it the ... of the gods. ... as man ... After a break of several lines whose contents, if ever recovered, should prove most illuminating, the poem describes a feast arranged by Enki for the gods, no doubt to commemorate the man's creation. At this feast, Enki and Ninma drank much wine and became somewhat exuberant. Thereupon Ninma took some of the clay which was over the abyss and fashioned 6 different types of individuals, while Enki decreed their fate and gave them bread to eat. However, only 2 of the creatures survived. Those were the barren woman and the sexless or eunuch. When Ninmah had created these 6 types of men, Enki decided to do some creating of his own. The manner in which he went about it is not clear, but whatever it is that he did, the resulting creature was a failure. It was weak and feeble in body and spirit. Enki was now anxious that Ninmah decided to help this forlorn creature. Ninmah tried to be good to the creature, but to no avail. She talked to him, but he failed to answer. She gave him bread to eat, but he did not reach out for it. He could neither sit nor stand, nor bend the knees. A long conversation between Enki and Ninmah then followed, but the tablets are so badly broken at this point that it is impossible to make out the sense of the contents. Finally, Ninmah seems to utter a curse against Enki because of the sick, lifeless creature that he produced, a curse which Enki seemed to accept as his due. Why man was created. There is another version concerning the creation of men. After the Anunnaki, the gods had been born, there existed neither cattle nor grain. The gods therefore knew not the eating of bread, nor the dressing of garments. The cattle god Lahar and the grain goddess Ashnan were then created in the creation chamber of heaven, but still the gods remained unsatiated. It was then that man was given breath for the sake of the welfare of the sheepfolds and good things of the gods. This introduction reads as follows. After on the mountain of heaven and earth, An, the heaven god, had caused the Anunnaki, his followers or children, to be born. Because the name Ashnan, the grain goddess, had not been born, had not been fashioned. Because Utu, the vegetation or sun god, had not been fashioned. Because to Utu no temenos or shrine had been set up. There was no ewe, no lamb was dropped. There was no goat, no kid was dropped. The ewe did not give birth to its 2 lambs. The goat did not give birth to its 3 kids. Because the name of Ashnan, the wise, and Lahar, the Anunnaki, the great gods, did not know. The grain of 30 days did not exist. The grain of 40 days did not exist. The small grains, the grain of the mountain, the grain of the pure living creatures did not exist. Because Utu had not been born, because the crown had not been raised, because the Lord had not been born, because Sumugan, the god of the plain, had not come forth. Like mankind when first created, they, the Anunnaki, knew not the eating of bread, knew not the dressing of garments, ate plants with their mouths like sheep, drank water from the ditch. In those days, in the creation chamber of the gods, in their house Dulkuk, Lahar and Ashnan were fashioned. The produce of Lahar and Ashnan, the Anunnaki of the Dulkuk eat but remain unsated. In their pure sheepfolds milk, and good things. The Anunnaki of the Dulkuk drink but remain unsated. For the sake of the good things in their pure sheepfolds, man was given breath. Amish and Anton, the farmer and the shepherd. The following is a myth which is somewhat parallel to the biblical Cain and Abel story, although it ended with reconciliation instead of murder. Enlil, the king of the gods, had set his mind to bring forth trees and grain and to establish abundance and prosperity in the land. For this purpose, the brothers Amish and Anton were created, and Enlil assigned to each specific duty. The text is so badly damaged at this point that it is impossible to make out the exact nature of these duties. The following very brief intelligible passages will at least indicate their general direction. Anton caused the ewe to give birth to the lamb, the goat to give birth to the kid. Cow and calf he caused to multiply, much fat and milk he caused to be produced. In the land, the heart of the wild goat, the sheep, and the donkey he made to rejoice. The birds of the heaven, in the wide earth, he had them set up their nests. The fish of the sea, in the swampland, he had them lay their eggs. In the palm grove and vineyard, he made to abound with honey and wine. The trees wherever planted, he caused to bear fruit. The furrows, ... Grain and crops he caused to multiply. Like Ashnan, the grain goddess, the kindly maid, he caused strength to appear. Amesh brought into existence the trees and the fields. He made wide the stables and the sheepfolds. In the farms he multiplied the produce. The ... he caused to cover the earth. The abundant harvest he caused to be brought into the houses. He caused the granaries to be heaped high. Whatever the nature of their original duties, most likely Amesh was the farmer, like Cain, and Anton was the shepherd, like Abel. A violent quarrel breaks out between the two brothers. Several arguments ensue, and finally Amesh apparently felt his work was more important than Anton's, and that he should be given the title of Farmer of the Gods. So they went to Enlil, the king of gods, who caused the good day to come forth, developed the notion that the earth should bring forth seed and be prosperous. He fashioned the prototype agricultural implements, the pickaxe and plow. Amesh's version of the quarrel, which begins with several flattering phrases cunningly directed to win Enlil's favor, is brief but as yet unintelligible. Then, Enlil answered Amesh and Anton. The life-producing water of all the lands, Anton is its knower. As a farmer of the gods, he has produced everything. Amesh, my son, how dost thou compare thyself with Anton, thy brother? The exalted word of Enlil, whose meaning is profound, the decision taken is unalterable. Who dares transgress it? Amesh bent the knees before Anton. Into his house he brought ... the wine of the grape and the date. Amesh presents Anton with gold, silver, and lapis lazuli. In brotherhood and friendship, happily they pour out libations. Together, to act wisely and well they determined, in the struggle between Amesh and Anton. Anton, the steadfast farmer of the gods, having proven greater than Amesh. ... O Father Enlil, praise. One language. There is a tablet that describes the blissful and unrivaled state of man in an era of universal peace, before he had learned to know fear and before the confusion of tongues. Its contents, which are the very reminiscent of the Tower of Babel, in Genesis chapter 11 verse 1, read as follows. In those days there was no snake, there was no scorpion, there was no hyena, there was no lion, there was no wild dog, no wolf, there was no fear, no terror, man had no rival. In those days the land Shubur, east, the place of plenty, righteous decrees, harmony tongue Sumer, south, the great land of the decrees of princeship. Uri, north, the land having all that is needful. The land Martu, west, resting in security. The whole universe, the people in unison. To Enlil, one tongue gave praise. The flood. Then there is a story that tells how the gods decided to wipe out men for some reason. The passage involved is completely destroyed. But at least some of the gods seem to regret this decision. It was probably the water god Enki, however, who insisted to save mankind. He informed Ziusudra, the last king listed in the Sumerian king list before the flood, Sumerian counterpart of the biblical Noah, pious, God-fearing, and humble king, of the dreadful decision of the gods, and advised him to save himself by building a very large boat. The long passage giving the details of the construction of the boat is destroyed. When the text begins again, it is in the midst of describing the flood. All the windstorms, exceedingly powerful, attacked as one. The deluge raged over the surface of the earth. After, for 7 days and 7 nights, the deluge had raged in the land. And the huge boat had been tossed about on the great waters. Utu, the sun god, came forth, who sheds light on heaven and earth. Ziusudra opened the window of the huge boat. Ziusudra, the king, before Utu, prostrated himself. The king kills an ox, slaughters a sheep. Again, a long break follows. When the text becomes intelligible once more, it is describing the immortalizing of Ziusudra. Ziusudra, the king, before An and Enlil, prostrated himself. Life like a god they give him. Breath eternal like a god they bring down for him. In those days, Ziusudra, the king, the preserver of the name of ... and men. In the mountain of crossing, the mountain of Dilmun, the place where the sun rises, they, An and Enlil, caused to dwell. The remainder of the poem is destroyed. Herewith I'm ending the telling of the myth from Mesopotamia of the Sumerian version. In my next video I will be continuing with other versions of Mesopotamian myth, some of which are similar to Abrahamic religious stories. Thank you for watching and hope to see you soon on my next video.